Welcome to the House of Brand, where we help unleash the true potential of your brand. If you're a business owner, leader, or C-suite executive and you're ready to scale your business to new heights, you're in the right place. I'm Torey, your guide in turning your brand into a strategic advantage for your company. In each episode, we get straight to the heart of what it takes to build a brand that drives growth, that shapes culture, and fuels your marketing efforts. So let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome to a new episode of House of Brand. Today, excited to have Aaron with me again. Aaron Huskins is one of our brand strategists with Brandcraft. Does a lot of our creative writing on brands. And so the subject today is going to be interesting. We hope you guys enjoy it. We're going to talk about archetypes. We're going to talk about celebrity profiles, personas, and then one question that we ask in branding that we probably get the most entertaining responses of, and why it spurs conversation, even I would say for some of our clients that think it's maybe, I don't know, they think it's cheesy or a little bit weird.
Yeah.
So should be a good one. Let's start with the definitions of kind of how we think about this, what are archetypes? And, you know, to me, if we go back, like I think in the evolution of an agency and the evolution of brand, archetypes weren't always something that we did. Mm-hmm. And when we started redefining our brand process about 2 years ago now, we started using them. And to me, I think what they helped with, but Aaron, I would love to know how they help maybe with you and how you envision a brand. For me, the archetype always helped me personify the brand. Mm-hmm. Like if someone said, you know, we talk about, you know, because tone and voice doesn't always cut it. That's just an approach to writing or speaking. But what is it that really makes this brand like a person? What makes them tick? What would you ask a person to see what their personality is like? Yeah. You know, a lot of times when you meet somebody, you'd ask them like, you know, all sorts of different things. What do you like to do on the weekends? Like, what's your family like? You ask all these questions. So for you, like when we work through a brand, when we get to the archetype stage, how do you try and, as you look through it, how do you try and fit brands within their archetypes? And then how do you think that those archetypes will be used in the future when someone reads through it?
Yeah, I guess I have two answers to that question. The first is you brought up already is voice and tone, which I think archetypes for me sort of influence that voice and tone. Mm-hmm. I think if you try to write voice and tone first and then do archetypes back, that you're kind of doing it backwards. To some degree, you need to know for the personality of who this brand is, and that helps you sort of think of how to write in that voice and tone. Like we talked a lot about what the difference between voice and tone is. We had a lot of those discussions early on too. And I think voice speaks to the archetypes more than it does to, you know, the tone. The tone is like, it can be different depending on where you are in the funnel, depending on where you are in your messaging, but your voice is consistent, and that voice is backed up by those archetypes and who your brand really is.
Yeah, interesting. So as you're saying that, I'm thinking about the times, like, you know, when you read a book, and I think books do a good job of, they give you all this background on the person. And in my mind, I create a version of that person as I'm reading a book, right? And so I think is kind of how when I'm working through an archetype, like I know the brand definition. I know now we're moving to this emotional part of brand, which is, okay, or maybe it's not emotional, but it's at least personified a little bit more. Right. But I think it is, it's emotion-based and it's personified. And then in my mind, I'm like, okay, what does that person look like and how do they talk? And what would they do that this other brand wouldn't do personification-wise? Mm-hmm. And I think that if we could always get maybe each person that read the brand guide after we were done to understand what mind frame we and the client were in when we that would be a win, right, on the archetype side.
Yeah, that was the second part. I was going to say I have two ways. And the other question is, how do I hope they use it? And I hope they use what they take from it is understanding the mindset that you're supposed to be in. And then when you're always writing, you understand you're writing from this archetype and from this position. Yeah. It's knowing this is who your brand is, this is who your company is to the consumer. And I mean the consumer, I don't mean the buyer. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes that gets a bad name using consumer lately, I've heard. But I mean the person who's going to be consuming this message, the person who's going to take in the words that they're hearing and reading from your brand.
Yeah, maybe audience at that point.
Audience is probably a better, exactly.
Yeah. So another way, actually, why don't we do this at this point? Let's just talk about, I'll go through the brand archetypes quickly. Yeah. I'll just list them all. I've seen for the most part, a lot of people using 12, which is what we do, 12 archetypes. Mm-hmm. I've also seen 16. And so there's 4 there that are added to it, but I think 12 is the most common, and we'll go over those 12. So quickly going through the list, there's the innocent, the hero, the everyman, the lover, the caregiver, the rebel, the magician, the sage, the explorer, the creator, the jester, and the ruler. And I would say, we do a lot of professional services. And there's a few here that I think we've never used.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing.
The ruler. I mean, when I just said that one, I realized we've never used anybody who's the ruler, I don't believe, which is kind of like the king or you might, express it.
Yeah, although now the more I've worked with some of these brands, the more I just go, when you say their desire is control, it's like, oh, I know who this is.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Maybe it's, the jester wants to make people laugh and bring lightheartedness. And not saying that these are bad archetypes, but I think, when you work with a certain type of company over and over, they too do tend to gravitate to certain archetypes and not others. So I think that's a challenge for us sometimes, is to build this in a way where when you recognize an archetype, is that you're still not trying to be the competitor, though. And sometimes that does which is why archetypes can't define a brand by themselves.
Right.
It just helps us understand that emotional and personification, and it gives it another layer on top of what we've already written before, which would be the brand promise, the reasons to believe, all these positioning. This just is giving it that extra, okay, how do we express this, and what is in what, like you said, voice and tone.
And what's the most authentic one too?
Yeah.
I think that's the most, when I look back on the first brand project I ever worked on at Brandcraft, I remember this was the conversation that sort of changed the way I looked at brand. You were going through and explaining these archetypes to me, and I remember going, to me at some point I just go, who cares though? Who cares what you think you are, what they answer, who do you need to be for your consumer? And you said that's not right. You're like, you don't pretend to be something you're not to be and I remember that just immediately turned the switch. And I think it's kind of what unlocked the way I look at brand and how I solve for brand now, which is, so it was a really interesting insight that you just it was easy. You just said, no, that's incorrect. Let me explain to you why.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an important part to remember. So yeah, we do come across a lot of the same ones, but I think it's not because they're not authentic. I wouldn't also want to pigeonhole someone in a service industry into one that they're not, just because we're trying to be different from the last people we were.
Yeah, I mean, as an example, I worked on one that you weren't a part of yet. You weren't a part of Brandcraft, where it was professional services, and they really did look at themselves as the hero and the ruler. The ruler of the industry, the ruler of the courtroom, everything was about force and power. And so it certainly can happen. And when we did a little white space mapping for them to say, where do you sit, in trying to figure out their emotional, if you can imagine the top right being the most ruler or dominant or type A, that they always were in the top right all the time. And so it was, as you said, it was on brand for them. And while we have other, that was in the attorney space. We have other attorneys that are much more the everyman, I would say. And a lot of those people work in, let's say, social security social security law. And wills and estates is another one where you just really have to be emotionally connected to your clients, and you can be more of the everyman.
Yeah, sometimes those everymans at first too, we talk about, will almost tease, like you said, we rarely use the lover, for example, but that always seems to be one that we're because they say a lot of things that feel like this. It kind of feels like the lover, but you realize, especially for an attorney, for example, like you gave, you can't just be a lover. You've got to be a little bit more of because you need someone to know that you're going to fight for them, and you can't just be all sunshine and rainbows all the time. You've got to be a little bit of an aggressive type.
Yeah, we have another professional services, a investment firm here in town that we did recently. And I don't recall, but was a part of their archetype the lover?
It definitely was in discussions. I don't know if we ended up using that, but it certainly feels
because we also used the word, remember,
intimacy.
Intimacy, yeah, was an emotion and that was strange for us to get there, but it also made a ton of sense for the things that they do and what we were talking about. And I don't believe it did make its way into the final archetype. So we talked about the everyman. So I don't want to go over all 12 archetypes, but we'll go over this one so just people understand what it means. So the everyman, A definition would be a sidekick. So this sidekick is comfortable because they're approachable. They don't take themselves too seriously. They're fair. They have high values and integrity. I don't love to talk about big brands, but I think it's important maybe to talk about big brands here. That Budweiser and Levi's are good examples of this archetype. Everyman brands are unpretentious, relatable, and approachable. They strive to create deep connections with people and long to be liked by all. They're often quite generalized and are driven by a core desire for community. We'll keep going, but there's a few other things. What do they desire?
Yeah.
They desire connection with others. What is their goal? Their goal is often belonging. What is their strategy? It's down to earth. It's trustworthy. Brand message, live together in harmony. I kind of, that one is fine. I see the everyman maybe more as not caring as much, but being very nice. Maybe harmony maybe isn't the right word, but that's fine. Traits, they're dependable, they're realistic, they're pragmatic, inclusive. They believe in equality. They fear exclusion, they fear standing out, they fear hostility, they fear isolation and separation. And so I think those are all really good things. That's just one. So remember, there's 12 of these in which you can mix. So what we do is we say, well, look, a brand can't be 100. Well, they could. I should back that up.
That's
a brand
true.
could be 100% everyman.
That's true.
We typically don't do that.
Right.
We pick a percentage and say this brand is 50% the everyman, 20%, let's say the lover, and the rest is the hero. And that would be a strange combo, but that's possible, I suppose. But we pick a percentage, and then so we pick little bits and pieces of each of these and say, if you meld these together, you will have the archetype of this company.
Yep.
Yeah. This one reminded me as we were talking about it, like this is, I think the politics of this one have kind of gone away. So I think it's okay to talk about, but I just recognized that we mentioned Budweiser.
Yeah.
And I think that this everyman definition had Budweiser in it even before they had the big dust up. And it reminds me that, in brand, I think part of the dust up was, did they pull out of being the everyman in that situation?
I 100% agree.
Yeah.
Yes, I 100% agree. I think what they had was a brand problem. I think it seemed they just completely forgot who their people are.
Yeah.
I probably shouldn't say this, but I remember I had joked that we should do like a message for ourselves, like a campaign, and say, like, don't forget who your buds are.
Yeah.
And do like a whole thing, because that's the point. I think what they did, there's nothing wrong with what they did if that was their stance. The problem is they built an entire core about this is who we are as a brand, this is who we serve, this is our people, these are our clients, and then they just kind of went for a completely different audience out of the blue, seemingly. I mean, they went from having funny ads about nights made of Budweiser boxes to what they did.
They were a true everyman when it comes to that. They were, and when it says everyman, it's like the typical quote unquote dude that hangs out in the cul-de-sac. Like that was.
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting about, and that's what's great about Archetypes, because I picture, when you say the everyman, I don't know what you picture. I picture a dude in jeans. He's got a what do they call the color, black and white striped or black and red striped shirt on, flannel, and he's, like I just have this vision in my head of this is what the everyman looks like, and Budweiser very much appealed to that. And all of a sudden they went to I guess I'd say the fringes of society, but I don't mean to say that's not in a negative way. Just mean they did go for a much more niche audience all of a sudden, and I think people just felt abandoned. Like, who is this brand anymore?
This is such a good example, because it doesn't matter what Budweiser did. In other words, what we're saying is like their sponsorship or coordination with the influencer they use. I don't think there's a judgment of whether that was good, bad, or indifferent.
Right, yeah. We're not a political statement.
No, it's not. But the idea that everybody or their main core audience looked at them and did personify Budweiser.
Yes, absolutely.
And personified to them. And it's as if your best friend just walked in and was talking something that they had never talked before. You're like, what's going on here?
Right.
Like, what? Now, some of the people's reaction was probably a little bit more over the top than
Certainly.
needed to be. But I think that's what happens, though, when you have built yourself a really strong persona, enough that in the example that we give, we mention a brand and say they are the everyman, along with Levi's. Like you said, the jeans.
Yep.
Jeep is one that comes up as the explorer, but also as the everyman, like one that it's non-pretentious. It's not,
a little bit rebel too. Jeep is, I think, I associate a little bit. I think there's that. Yeah.
Actually, other brands here that we have listed for everyman are Ford. So Ford may be the better example than Jeep.
Yeah.
and IKEA. I think IKEA mainly on price point and availability to
Sure.
the
Yeah.
average person.
A lot of people.
But-
Yeah.
Okay, great. So so that's archetypes.
Yes.
Another thing that we've done, I don't know if it was because we got stuck with archetypes, or at one point, this sometimes happens with, I have ADHD, so I sometimes decide, let's do something different.
Yeah.
But we used, and I don't know if you and I have done this before. Have we used a celebrity profile before?
Yes. One time. Yes,
Okay.
we have.
And that was the attorney.
No, it was the, I don't know if I should say there specifically, but it's the drilling company. They do the drilling. Maybe I can cut this out.
Oh,
We used,
okay.
I can't remember his name, which just cracks me up. We used him as a celebrity profile, but the guy with the mustache. And
Yeah.
the famous actor. It kills me. I can never remember his name. Anyway, that's the one time we have, yes.
Okay. And then we've used it 2 other times. Ironically, both of them were attorneys. So the first attorney where we used this, we were having a hard time nailing it down on archetypes, I think because they were so diverse in their services that we couldn't quite figure out how to place them because, like we were saying, they were defense attorneys, but they were also doing Social Security, and so it was like it's hard to figure out where they fit. So instead we went, okay, what's your bigger promise in your ethos?
Mm-hmm.
And we decided that it was the fact that they can uncomplicate these complicated matters. And so their
Yes.
tagline was based on that. And then we said, well, who else? What's maybe a celebrity profile that can uncomplicate complicated matters? And so we went with Neil deGrasse Tyson
Very interesting.
and said, well, he's like one that is obviously a very smart dude, but can also be on a late night show
Yeah.
and keep everybody engaged.
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was like, okay, he can take complex subjects, talk about it to the everyman.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, that was a great, and we kind of explained why we used him and what that meant. It meant, taking complicated matters and be able to talk about them.
Yeah,
I think we did work on another one. Remember Liam Neeson?
I do. I worked on that project. I wasn't on the brand project, but I worked on the
Okay.
messaging that came after it. Yeah. I
Yeah.
do remember that one.
I
That was
think
my
that-
first introduction to this celebrity profile. Yeah.
It was. I think it was Thomas's too, because when
Yes.
Thomas saw it, he said at first he didn't understand like what's going on here. What is this?
Yeah.
What does this mean? That one was a bit of a stretch using him because I said, well, it can't just be the actor. It has to be this one character that he played.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's become since, unfortunately, playing that character for him. Unfortunately for him, that's all he's done since.
His
So,
roles have been
yeah.
very,
He's become typecast. Yeah.
I haven't seen his new one, but so celebrity profiles are interesting. They're a way that we have a little bit of fun with archetypes, basically. Like, okay, if we can't describe an archetype, I think there's a way that if you start talking to me about Neil deGrasse Tyson and what I start to understand and go, okay, that makes sense about how would he describe complex legal matter?
I don't want to like give this as advice, but in the age of AI, I think this celebrity archetype, celebrity profile situation might actually be the best, because I think if you went to ChatGPT, for example, and said, write me a Liam Neeson.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna get a lot more close. You're gonna get a lot closer to
Yes.
on brand than you would if you tried to just do it out of the blue without thinking about that or having that. And you just went to ChatGPT and said, write me something. So
This is true. Actually, this is a good idea that we should put in our future brand guides, which is AI prompts. These are the AI prompts you need to use.
yeah, that might be it.
What-
That's a pretty good idea.
Yeah, I mean,
That's-
so that you understand, like, hey, we have a really easy way of defining what the voice and tone is. Just Liam
Yeah,
Neeson in
this
this
is
character.
your prompt.
Yeah.
Yeah. From now on, when you write an ad, write it with this. Start. Yeah, that's actually not terrible.
So that there's not much more to talk about there. We go through the process of basically, this is just exploration for us when we get to celebrity profile.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to say there's some science behind it, but to us, it's more what or who or what character identifies with what we see right now of the brand. That's it. I mean, it's fun, and I think the client has fun with it, and I think it works. And if you can do both of those, if it can be a fun way to really hit the point of who this brand is, why not do it?
Yeah. I think to some degree it's more helpful from a writing standpoint than the archetypes are. I think sometimes you can, even if you have a celebrity profile first, it helps you back into those archetypes, because I think you could easily say, well, which one of these best fits Liam Neeson, for example? And then you're going to know this is who I am. Obviously, again, it has to be authentic. We're not just going to make
right.
something up. But I of all the things we do, and you're going to get into another one I know later down the road, of all the things we do, the celebrity profile actually is my favorite, because I typically end up writing a lot of messaging afterwards. And it's a lot more fun for me to say, okay, I'm going to write this monologue now as if I'm writing it for Morgan Freeman, than it is when I have to say, okay, I'm going to write this for The Rebel. There's a little bit direction there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that for the people working on the brand, that could include our client group and us. We understand how we got to the archetypes. And so I think it's important that we all knew how we got there. But I do think it's easier for the brand writer and the designer and other people in marketing to understand the celebrity profile than they can to understand how to exactly use the archetype. Like, does everybody that reads that know how to mix 40% everyman and 20% hero? Like, I don't know that they do. Like, and so it's our job to educate our clients on that. But at some point, we're out of the picture too. They take this and they run with it. And so, I think it's a good alternative to that. As we were talking about Liam Neeson, it also reminds me that he is a character where you could mix that everyman and the hero,
definitely, and
the lover. Like, you could mix all, and he's a perfect example of that. Of that certainly has everyman qualities, which is why his hero part is so probably such a draw, is because he has a set of skills. So
particular set of skills that make me a nightmare for someone like you.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, and third and last, and this isn't necessarily a direct correlation to either celebrity profiles or archetypes, but it is about making emotional connections. And instead of personifying, what are we? We are
anamorphizing.
Yeah, anamorphizing. So a question that we ask to everybody that goes through our brand process, and we've done this both as an interview question where we hit them with it in a positioning exercise. And we've also done it as, here, fill this out
in a survey.
And we want to see what responses we get back in a survey. And that is, if your company was an animal, what animal would it be? I like it because there's always somebody in the crowd who is that, either they're very serious or they think we're not taking the process serious enough, that doesn't like the question. They're not comfortable with it.
Yep.
They think, because one of the things we've always fought on the creative side, not so much on the brand side, because our process has a lot of, meat to it, and it's smart, and it's, it's scientific, but also it's creative. But on the design side, I've always tried to fight that notion that we play with crayons and we draw stuff, and it always kind of minimizes it, and it brings it down to this level of like high school or middle school or something.
A little bit, yeah.
And so I've always tried to stay away from that and saying like, no, what we do on the brand side and the design side is based on, data. It's based on professional advice. It's things that we've seen, like scaling businesses of all different kinds. And so asking the question, if your company was an animal, what would it be, always makes me a little bit uncomfortable that we're going back to that.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just a fun exercise in which but it's not. And the responses that we get often lead to conversations that really help us define these either celebrity profiles or archetypes by asking that question. And so I'll get I know that you have ideas here to talk about. But one thing I want to say is that the reason that we ask the question is to get some of those people who can't separate themselves from the technical side of the brand to instead jump back and say, no, I need you to give me an emotional answer now. Now, some of them, I wouldn't say cheat, but they still go to the technical side. Well, this animal builds things and we build things.
Right.
And that's fine. And however you want to define it. Others, though, go to like the emotional side, which is, the definition of a tiger is fierce and strong and fast. And they start to really put that together. Others like, no, we're like an elephant. We're caring. And so that's always great. And I would say that we get responses that can vary at times, but often there's a theme, which is always good.
Yeah, the theme, the most consistent theme, I think, is we usually like to have someone from the sales team, like your sales leader or someone in the meeting. Always they're a predator. They're always a hawk. They're always a tiger. They're always a lion. Yeah. And I'm like, of course, like you almost have to, it's like, yep, nope, we know what you're going to say because you're out there, knocking down doors and trying to get whatever you can get on the sales side. I don't mean that. We don't actually ignore it. But the point I'm making is that
no, but we do try to walk them through it. Though.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
When they say it, we say, well, do you mean that you are that, or do you mean that the brand is that? And so we just try and help them understand what our job is.
Yeah.
Which is not to define you as not a tiger,
right?
But to define the brand as
yes,
living with some kind of animal, human, emotional
Right,
traits. Like, how
right.
would you describe
When
it?
you're out there being a tiger and you're attacking, after you've got your prey, what are you telling them about your company?
Exactly.
Let's get past that. I think that's the funny thing is I always know it's like, because a lot of times they're like, what is it? They're anonymous. So it's like, survey entry number 3. It's like entrant number 3, right? And I'll just go number 3. And every time we get in the meeting, I'm always like, okay, who was this? Who was the? I always really know. I'm like, it's the sales guy sitting across the room. You can tell who answered what question. I think the best thing about that is the discussions that come up afterwards. Like you said, I think there's something that's interesting about everyone sort of sees the brand a certain way, and when they start applying those emotional attributes to it, which is what we're trying to get them to see with that question. It helps us better identify, like, what is it that you really think and feel about this company?
Yeah.
What is the personality of this company? Essentially it's the brand of this company. Like, how is it that you feel about and think about, and who really are you at your core? And so we get a lot of different answers, like you said, from the salespeople to like the technical side people. But I think if you can find whatever that commonality is, that really helps unlock these other things, these archetypes and personality.
Yeah, that's an interesting insight, because let's say that we have 6 people in one of our brand exercises that we do. I always really do, and I know that you've mentioned some of the same things. I really do try and not read who submitted the response. Like when they get, if we do a survey, I really just try to read the responses.
Yeah.
But often I'll do it by person, so I'll read all of their responses at once, and then I'll go to the next. And it's funny because once we get in the exercise and someone starts talking, I already know who they were and what they said.
Yeah.
And so I think, look, we try and be as unbiased as we can about bringing our own personal or each individual's personal agenda into a brand. But it's also what makes it great.
I was going to say, personal brand can't be ignored either, though.
Yeah.
And there's a reason these people resonate, and there's a reason these people are in the room, right? If you're a leader of the business and you've invited this person in, this salesperson, it's not because they're off the wall and don't align. They align, obviously, to some degree. The founder believes so.
True.
So we can't ignore that opinion just because you're a salesperson. And I think that's the idea. It's like, I might go, yeah, I can tell this is the salesperson, but I've got to dig deeper now, and I know what questions to ask that person to figure out, all right, why is it that you align? Why is it that your personality vibes so well with this company? Because that's important. That salesperson's not going anywhere, hopefully. The brand is, to some degree, that person too.
Yeah. So last thing, and then we'll kind of wrap this up and maybe end with, this is how these things, how they tie together and why they're important. But personas is the last one. And I will say, of the work that we do, I think we would both agree that we tend to not put a ton of time into personas during the brand process, but instead wait until the marketing process to do that. At times, sometimes personas are developed and then brought to us by our client even. And sometimes they are better at putting personas together. But basically a persona is a set of demographics and psychographics and any other information you really want to add depth to it. But it defines a subset of your customers. And it's just a document that, many that do these want them to be very specific, even to the point you might give them a name. It would be a name, it would be, and what they do. And so they're handy, especially in the marketing side when you're trying to develop those audiences, is to know exactly what persona are we going to market to, where's that persona going to land on what landing page, what information would appeal to them. And I think on a really complex digital marketing side, your funnel would definitely be set up by persona. Why do we even bring up persona? Because it's not really, in my opinion, a part of brand, although it could be done at that stage, especially if you want to do some market research to really understand what personas are. We choose not to do that, but you could do it at this stage. And I think we'll just wrap up with this. I think the biggest difference is that archetypes, celebrity profiles, and the animal question, they're meant to define and help marketers understand how to express the brand that they work for, how to express the brand that they're employed by, or the one that they own if they're the owner. We're really trying to help them express it to the consumer. Personas are meant to express what the customer is like back to the brand.
Right.
And those are separate. They're two different things. And we always want to keep our client in the mindset of who are you and how are you going to define that to your customer? Because I believe at times our clients can get hung up on their persona and being whatever they want to be to their persona.
Yes. Yeah. This is exactly what I was talking about at the start that you told me about with the archetypes. Right. Yeah.
And so I think that's how, that's how we look at all of this. I would just wrap it up to say that this is one of the subject that we talked about today, the celebrity profile, the archetypes, the animal question, and the personas, leaving personas out. I think it's really it's what keeps people engaged in these brand documents as well. There's some dry stuff in there. Some of the positioning can get kind of dry.
It can, yeah.
Some of the, there's always a visual part to the brands we create. So, the fonts and the headings and, that stuff's all fine. But this type of work really brings it to life. And that's why I enjoy it so much.
Yeah. Yeah. No, me too. I agree. I think this is what makes, to me, like the messaging and the words and stuff sexy. It's what makes it because we get through the messaging before we get into the visual identity stuff. So I think it's this part that makes it engaging for our clients as well. But I hope that's for the right reasons. I hope it's because now they're starting to be able to see and visualize, even though there are no visuals yet. And I think that's what archetypes and that's what especially celebrity profiles and things like that can do, is you can go, okay, I can see it, I can hear it.
Yeah.
I can hear this voice, I can hear the style of how you say it, the cadence. All of a sudden it starts having a lot more life once you can put it to an animal or to a person or to a, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, I agree. I think this is really what because emotion is what it's all about. At the end of the day, we're trying to get some kind of emotional response, some kind of something that's going to stop the scroll and get you to pay attention. And I think this is where people start to see it, is when you can identify with this. Yeah.
Yeah. We try during our brand process, and this is something you and I have maybe battled, not in a bad way, but trying to come up with the best process to figure out, where I always say, I want there to be a lack of emotion for the first few stages of this before we start bringing it in, because sometimes emotion can dominate the conversation and dominate everyone's opinion. And so instead you say, hey, we have to solve some problems first. We do that during positioning. We solve some problems. And then we say, okay, that's decided. Then now let's move into the emotional part, which is archetypes, celebrity profiles, the animal question. And it still seems like the right way to go about it.
Yeah.
But I also will have to admit that I'm often thinking forward on this, even when we're in the positioning stage of, wait a minute, so what archetype would they be? And because it just helps me now start to personify them easier.
Yeah, it's because I think our process is so immersive. I'm using that like almost TM, like trademarked, but it's like our process is so immersive. I think that it's hard to separate those two things. We get so much information in those exercises. I think it's almost hard to explain unless you've been a part of one. You just understand so much more about a person's personality. At first, it's always awkward and it's like starts quiet, but eventually by the end of it, it's like you feel like you know everyone in that room.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard not to walk away and go, okay, I know who this archetype is, I know who this is. Like there's some degree you have to do all of that, but I think that is why it's wise. I think your original approach is wise. We have to start with positioning and take away the emotion and say, who is it we're here to serve? Who are we? And just be very bare bones about it. And then let's build the emotion on that afterwards.
Yeah.
The good news is we get all that information in one, but you have to have a foundation, and the positioning is that foundation.
Agreed. Well, this has been a great conversation for you guys watching. If you want to try and create your own personas, your own archetypes for yours, there's a ton of information out on both YouTube and Google about this. The personas that we use are not unique. They are ones that we have found and used, and they were created by a psychologist around 1950, I think. So it's nothing that you can't look up. Now, the experience of knowing how to define them is something that will take practice. Certainly reach out or comment if you have any questions. Other than that, thank you for watching another episode of House of Brand. And Aaron, thank you for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks.
Later.